All right, so this is my final project. I did it on Jewish food culture, and more specifically, I did more of like the holiday foods for Judaism and a little bit of history in that. So let's get started. When I was doing these interviews, two of the quotes that different people, actually multiple people, basically said to me, one of them was, "Where there's Jews, there's food," and it's definitely true for Jewish culture and what they believe in. Another one is for most of the holidays, essentially, is they tried to kill us, they failed, let's eat. And as you'll be able to see, that's especially true for special foods and just foods in general for holidays and celebrations. All right, so to start off, we'll do like a little very quick history of the Jewish people. Obviously, you have the three fathers of Jewish people: Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You can fast forward to Moses. You got a picture here with slavery in Egypt and splitting of the Red Sea and freedom and the establishment of the first kingdom of Israel. Subsequent exile into Babylonia, finally return to Israel, to be followed by an exile by the Romans and the diaspora. So the diaspora is the dispersion of Jews after they were forced to leave Israel and Jerusalem. As you can see, Jews went everywhere after they left Jerusalem, and they've basically been spread up into essentially two main groups, Ashkenazi and Sephardi. As you can see, Ashkenazi are mostly from the European area, Eastern Europe, France, Germany, England, while Sephardi are mostly Iberian Peninsula, so Spain and Portugal, as well as the Middle East, little parts, and North Africa. And so there's differences other than just the food culture, which we'll see here. But other than just that there's cultural differences between the Ashkenazi and Sephardi from how they say certain letters in Hebrew, to the foods they eat, to certain just cultural things and how they do different celebrations. So kosher is the main thing that brings Jewish food all together. Originally it's from the Bible, so from God, in both Leviticus chapter 11 and Deuteronomy chapter 14, as basic laws about what animals you can and can't eat. And so for animals like cows and sheep, the rules are it has to chew its cud and has split hooves. And so, a big example of animal that doesn't do, one or both of these would be a pig. So pig and pork are not kosher foods. Has a list of all the birds, so like chicken, that Jews can eat, as well as rules about fish, that they must have fins and scales, so no shellfish or bottom dwellers, as well as certain insects that Jews can eat. So there's, I believe, 4 insects. And then as the Jews were displaced in the diaspora, the rabbis came up with more rules with more restrictions, as well as just clarifying certain rules from the Bible. So rules like not mixing meat and milk at all come from the law of not boiling a kid in its mother's milk. As you can see above, that's some of the little symbols for symbolize kosher food. You can see on the Heinz ketchup bottle next to the Heinz logo above America's favorite ketchup, there's the little OU, which stands for Orthodox Union. It's a kosher symbol showing that this product is kosher. One thing that Jews do is blessing over their meals. So they do blessings both before and after the meal. And of course, the blessing before the meal depends on, as well as after, depends on the foods that's going to be eaten. So if it's just fruits or veggies or grain or whatever you're eating, you can just say a smaller blessing, versus if it's has bread in it, it's considered a full meal. You say hamotzi, as well as a longer blessing after the meal. So my main part of my presentation is going to be on the holiday foods, since there's so many and their different cultures and customs come from the holidays as well, and there's so much symbolism with them. There's a little picture of different holidays. You can see there's foods on these pictures of what they represent. So the foods themselves are representatives of the holidays. And they come with the holidays either because of the laws about what you're supposed to eat from them or what you're not supposed to eat, as well as traditions that have from what the holiday represents, or symbols from, the past. So the first holiday of the Jewish year is Rosh Hashanah, which is the New Year. Some of the foods people eat are apples and honey, which symbolize apple for roundness and completeness, as well as honey for a sweet year. A round challah, which I'll do more on challah later on, but challah, it's like a bread. And so the roundness also for completion of the yearly cycle. Honey cakes and pomegranates. So honey cakes against sweetness for a sweet year, and pomegranates for the blessing should be as many as the seeds in a pomegranate. Yom Kippur is the next holiday. It's actually a fast day. It's a 25-hour fast where you're not supposed to eat food, drink water. So an important thing would be the break fast after the fast, as well as the pre-fast meal. You want to eat, hearty foods that are going to take long to digest, as well as, not as hearty foods maybe for the break fast, so you don't want to, eat too much after you haven't eaten it all the entire day. The next holiday is Sukkot, and so while it doesn't have necessarily foods that you're supposed to eat on the holiday, it does have, where you're supposed to eat in this sukkah, this little hut that you make. As you can see the picture, people eating in the hut. You're supposed to eat and sleep and, do things in this, temporary dwelling to symbolize the temporary dwellingness of the Jewish people after they came out of Egypt. And so some of the foods you can see in the picture, there's fruits hanging from the ceiling of it. And so fruits are also, very common in this time for this holiday. The next holiday is Hanukkah, one of many people's favorites. So you can see the menorah with the candles, and important foods are the fried foods, so latkes and donuts, which symbolize the oil, the miracle of the oil. Which, if you don't know the story of Hanukkah, there is a revolt and a civil war, and after all the battles, the Jews wanted to light this menorah. You can see here with the it didn't have candles back then, so they had just pure oil, and they only found enough oil for one day, and when they poured it in and lit it, it lasted for 8 days. And so you have fried and oil foods like the fried potato latkes and jelly stuffed donuts. And another thing more common now is this chocolate corn gelt. It's very common as well nowadays. So the next holiday is Purim, which just happened just last week, actually. And so the holiday of Purim has essentially two main foods that I put down: hamantashen, which are these stuffed cookies stuffed with jellies or chocolate or poppy seeds or something else, and they represent either the hat that the villain of the story wore or his ears. There's a discrepancy on what they represent, as well as a good deed, a mitzvah to get drunk on Purim, and you're supposed to drink so much that you don't know the difference between the good guy in the story Mordechai and the bad guy in the story Haman. You can tell Hamantashen, it comes from the name is from his hat or his ears, but it's for him. Next one is a big holiday, Passover. Now Passover has a big rule where you're not supposed to eat bread products with yeast. It's supposed to symbolize when the Jews came out of Egypt, they didn't have time to have their bread rise, and so it was flat when they came out. And so you're supposed to, for the 8 days of this holiday, you don't eat any bread products with yeast, or for the Ashkenazi and some other people, you don't eat corn or rice or nuts and stuff. And so it's a very big difference when you can't have any corn products with high fructose corn syrup and so many foods today. And all of a sudden you have to have these special kosher for Passover foods. Passover also has the Passover Seder, which is this full meal. It's the first 2 nights of Passover, and it has 4 cups of wine which you're supposed to drink, each symbolizing something else. The dipping of vegetables, you're supposed to do it twice, as well as the Hillel sandwich, which many Jews argue was the first ever sandwich made. It's from Hillel in the 1st century, and it comes where you have 2 pieces of matzah, and you put in horseradish, the maror, the horseradish, as well as some haroset, which is this chunky apples and food mixed up, which is supposed to represent the mortar. And so all the foods in Passover, each thing, as you can see on the plate, has a different representation. So the egg, the shank bone, the haroset, the maror, everything has its own symbolism for what it means. And it's a big holiday. It's arguably the biggest holiday, for Jews, symbolizing the redemption and coming out of slavery in Egypt. and freedom. The next holiday is Shavuot, which celebrates the giving of the Torah, the Bible, to the Jewish people. And that's 60 days after the second night of Passover. People commonly celebrate with dairy products, so like cheese blintzes, cheesecake, and then a symbol is wheat for Shavuot as well. And that comes from the story of Ruth, which is read during this holiday. The story of Ruth has a whole thing where she is gathering wheat in the fields, and that's where she meets her future husband and says that she wants to convert to Judaism and, you know, join the Jewish people. And from that conversion and everything ends up the line of King David. Next holiday kind of is Tisha B'Av, which is a fast day. And so you know, just like the other fast day, you know, you have to have a good meal before as well as an important meal afterwards. And from what some of my research I read, many people use this fast with dairy products. Again, this fast day, while Yom Kippur is commemorating like Judgment Day and this, you know, Day of Atonement as it's called, Tisha B'Av is a much sadder day rather than a serious day. This is a day of mourning for the destruction of the temples and the diaspora and everything the subsequent, basically everything that bad has happened to the Jewish people is, you know, is on this day. So those are all, you know, the main holidays, you know, for all of the calendar for the Jewish people. But once a week, there's also the holiday of Shabbat. So that's Friday night as well as Saturday. It goes from Friday night to Saturday night. And so Friday night, there's a Shabbos meal, a festive meal every week. And so, you know, it's a big meal for families and you know, people will invite friends. And so meal will commonly have challah bread, which is this braided bread, you know, that goes, and you're supposed to have two of those. They represent, you know, the two tablets that were given to Moses. And then, you know, the meal it's a meal. So you want to have, you know, people have salad, there's soup, you know, matzo ball soup is the common thing. There's a fish part of it for some people, so you have gefilte fish. So for, you know, some cultures they have a cold gefilte fish, some have hot gefilte fish, some it's made with salmon, some with other fishes. You know, there's a lot of different, you know, for different families have different traditions. You know, chicken or some type of meat, you know, it can be, you know, anywhere from brisket to, you know, chicken to anything, as well as, you know, kugel is another common food for Shabbat, which is like a noodle, you know, pudding kind of thing with potatoes and noodles. And so there's different types as well. There's a noodle one, potato one, different things. And then another food for the Saturday, for the next day, is cholent that a lot of people eat. Because for more religious Jews, you're not supposed to use electricity or make a fire on Shabbat. And so in order, as like a loophole that people made, and so you can't create a fire, but you can also extinguish one. And so if you start, you know, cooking a meal before Friday night, then it's okay to kind of, you know, let it continue cooking throughout the rest of the day. And so if you put, you know, all these meats and beans and foods into a big pot, you put it over a fire, then let it warm up for, you know, overnight at a low temperature, you know, so it doesn't burn, but you let it warm up and heat up the night. So the night, and the next day, you know, you can eat the cholent and it's still nice and warm, and it's a, you know, a warm, hearty meal for the rest of the day when you're not supposed to, you know, cook things and have, you know, warm food necessarily because you can't cook. So that's the holiday foods, but there's other, you know, Jewish, you know, influenced foods. You know, there's such a global, you know, rise in Jewish influence in the world from foods. You know, pickles and herring, which come from, you know, Northern European Jews, you know, from Amsterdam and the Netherlands, and, you know, that where herring and pickling foods was so common. And, you know, pickles now are such a big thing, and there's the kosher style and kosher dill pickles. You know, bagels and lox, another Jewish food, you know, contributed to, you know, bagels and schmear with, you know, lox and capers and onions and all that is definitely a Jewish influenced food. Jewish delis, you know, with, you know, a Reuben sandwich and corned beef, you know, is definitely, you know, kosher style, and, you know, Jewish style delis are a big thing. Even though, you know, if you, as you remember with kosher, you know, with a regular Reuben, which will have, you know, the cheese and the meat, you know, it might not necessarily be a kosher sandwich, but it still has this influence of, you know, Jewish foods. As well as in my research, I learned fish and chips are actually Jewishly influenced as well. You know, Jews from, you know, Sephardi Jews from Spain and North Africa would commonly cook their fish in oil and fry it in oils. And so when they emigrated to England, they started doing this, and it became very popular. And so to relate, everything that I learned in the last bit of this project to the course, food ideology and symbolism is such a big thing for Jews and Jewish people. With every food you eat for the holidays, is symbolic and has a reason to be there. From the fried foods for Hanukkah to eating matzah and the whole Passover Seder. The ideology and symbolism is always there for Jewish food and Jewish holidays. And for food taboos, as we learned about, kosher is such a big thing. These restrictions on what foods you can and can't eat. The type of food. There's also with kosher and how they kill an animal, and so they have to kill the animal in a certain way in order to make it kosher. And so there's these taboos that are restrictions in one sense, but they also unite the Jewish people in the foods that they can eat, because they only could eat the foods that were allowed. And so no matter where you went, if a Jew was serving you food, no matter if it was a different culture or different type of food, you knew that it was okay to eat because another Jew was giving it to you. For food as medicine, a big thing, soups, and matzo ball soup has commonly been used throughout the ages by Jews as medicine for the common cold and other such diseases. And even Maimonides, the great scholar back in the day, used to give matzo ball soup to all of his students when they were sick, and he ended up becoming the Sultan Saladin, his head doctor, because when Saladin was sick, he gave matzo ball soup to him, and it made the man feel better, and Saladin appointed him as the head doctor. And then the globalization and influence of foods from Jewish just influence and just the Jewish culture, as I pointed out in the last slide. You can see foods like fish and chips, or even the sandwich, as I pointed out on a previous slide. Those have been influenced by the Jewish people throughout history. And so here's a little bibliography. This is from the interviews and conversation I had with people around campus and important people in the Jewish community here, as well as family members, to get more information about my topic. And then here is bibliography for the Bible and the rest of what I used. I hope you guys learned something. I had a fun time, learning about this, making it. It was cool to learn things like the fish and chips thing with England. It's funny that, the two main English foods, fish and chips and sandwiches, England's two great, gifts to culinarism. And those are both Jewish influenced foods, heavily. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed my project. Thanks for watching.